When you understand the power of silence backed by self-respect, everything about how you respond to being ignored begins to change. Most people think silence is weakness. They think if you don't speak up, don't explain yourself, don't demand clarity, then you're losing. But the truth is, silence with self-respect is not empty. It is full. It is full of boundaries, confidence, and emotional maturity. And when a man ignores you, the most powerful thing you can do is not react from emotion, but respond from dignity. Being ignored triggers fear. Fear of abandonment. Fear of not being enough. Fear of losing someone you care about. That fear pushes people to chase, to double text, to call late at night, to ask, did I do something wrong? But the moment you do that, you give your power away. You send a message that says your peace depends on someone else's attention. And once a man feels that, he stops valuing what comes too easily. Silence, when it comes from self-respect, is not about punishing someone or playing games. It's about refusing to beg for basic decency. It's about understanding that attention, time, and emotional access are privileges, not rights. When a man ignores you and you immediately react, you're teaching him that ignoring you has no consequences. You're showing him that he can disappear and still have full access to you whenever he wants. And human nature doesn't respect what it doesn't have to work for. When you choose silence instead of reaction, something interesting happens. The dynamic shifts. The chase stops. The noise disappears. And in that quiet space, a man is left alone with his thoughts. He starts replaying moments. He starts wondering why you're not calling, why you're not angry, why you're not chasing. And that curiosity turns into concern. Concern turns into reflection. Reflection turns into desire. See, men are problem solvers by nature. When there's no problem, they relax. But when something they value becomes uncertain, their mind engages. Your silence becomes the problem he can't solve easily, not because you're cold, but because you're no longer predictable. And predictability kills attraction faster than anything else. Self-respect means you don't explain your worth to anyone. You don't send long paragraphs trying to convince someone to see you. You don't demand effort from someone who isn't offering it freely. You let action speak. And silence is an action, a powerful one. It says, I noticed the shift. I respect myself too much to chase it. This kind of silence isn't passive. It's intentional. You're not sitting by the phone waiting. You're living your life. You're protecting your energy. You're focusing on your purpose, your peace, your growth. And that energy shift is felt even from a distance. Because when someone is no longer emotionally available on demand, their absence becomes noticeable. What most people don't realize is that men don't respond to words as much as they respond to behavior. You can tell a man 1,000 times how you deserve better. But the moment you stop tolerating less, that's when he starts listening. Silence forces accountability in a way arguments never will. Arguments give him something to push against. Silence gives him something to miss. There's also dignity in not needing the last word. When you walk away quietly without insults, without drama, without begging, you leave a lasting impression. You become the person who didn't break down, the one who didn't lose control, the one who chose self-respect over emotional chaos. That kind of composure stays in a man's mind far longer than tears or anger ever could. And let's be honest, if someone can ignore you and feel comfortable doing it, they don't fear losing you yet. Silence introduces that fear, not through threats, but through absence. It makes him realize that access to you was not guaranteed, that you had options, that you had a life beyond him. And once a man feels that he can lose you, his behavior changes. This doesn't mean every man will come back. And that's important. Silence is not a trick to control someone. It's a filter. It reveals who values you and who was only comfortable with you when you were convenient. If a man comes back after silence, it's because he felt the loss. If he doesn't, it's because he never truly valued the connection in the first place. Either way, you win because you kept your self-respect intact. There's strength in knowing that your worth doesn't decrease because someone fails to recognize it. Silence is how you honor that truth. You don't lower yourself to be understood. You don't chase validation from someone who's unsure. You allow life to respond to your standards instead of your fears. When a man ignores you and you remain calm, grounded, and unavailable to emotional chaos, you communicate confidence without saying a word. Confidence says, I'll be okay with or without you. And that mindset is magnetic because neediness repels, but self-assurance attracts. Silence with self-respect is not about waiting for him to come back. It's about choosing yourself regardless of what he does. And ironically, that's exactly what makes men come back. Not because you begged, not because you explained, but because you showed that you know who you are, what you deserve, and what you will no longer accept. When you remove access to yourself, a man doesn't just notice your absence, he feels it. Most people misunderstand what it really means to be missed. They think being missed comes from constant reminders, from staying present, from never letting someone forget you exist. But in reality, people miss what they no longer have easy access to. Familiarity creates comfort, but loss creates awareness. And awareness is what makes a man reflect on what he had when you were there. Access is everything. Your time, your attention, your emotional availability, your care, these are valuable currencies. When you give them freely to someone who isn't showing up consistently, you unintentionally teach them that your presence is unlimited. And human nature doesn't treasure what feels unlimited. Men, like all people, value what feels earned and fear what feels like it can be lost. When a man ignores you, but still knows you're available, whenever he decides to come back, there's no urgency. He feels no pressure to change his behavior. He knows you're there. He knows you'll respond. He knows he has access. And as long as that access remains, he has no reason to reflect, grow, or correct his actions. The shift happens when access is removed quietly and firmly, not with drama, not with ultimatums, just with distance. When you stop being instantly available, stop answering late-night messages, stop providing emotional support without commitment, something breaks in his comfort zone. Suddenly, the dynamic changes. The certainty he had about you is gone, and uncertainty forces attention. Men don't miss women because of words. They miss them because of experiences, the conversations, the laughter, the peace, the support, the way you made life feel lighter. When those experiences disappear, the contrast becomes obvious. Silence amplifies memory. In the absence of new interactions, the mind replays old ones. That's when missing begins. There is also a powerful psychological element at play. When something is taken away, the brain assigns it greater value. It's called scarcity. And when your presence becomes scarce, your value rises in his mind. Not because you changed, but because access to you changed. The same version of you suddenly feels more important because it's no longer guaranteed. This is why chasing never works. Chasing keeps access open. It reassures him that no matter what he does, you remain emotionally available. And as long as he believes that, he doesn't feel losing you. But the moment you pull back, the possibility of loss becomes real. And fear of loss is a stronger motivator than comfort. Removing access is not about punishment. It's about balance. Relationships thrive on reciprocity. When one person gives and the other only takes, attraction dies. By removing access, you restore balance. You stop overgiving. You stop carrying the emotional weight alone. And you allow the connection to either rise to your standard or fall away. A man starts to miss you when he realizes he no longer has unlimited access to your energy. When he can't call whenever he wants and expect the same warmth. When he can't disappear and return without consequence. When he feels the difference between life with you and life without you. That contrast is powerful. Another thing people don't talk about is how access affects respect. When you are always available, your time appears less valuable. But when you have boundaries, when you prioritize your own life, your time becomes precious, and people respect what they perceive as valuable. Men, in particular, respond to women who have full lives, strong boundaries, and limited availability, not because they are unavailable emotionally, but because they are selective. When you remove access, you're also giving yourself space to heal and think clearly. You're no longer stuck in a cycle of waiting and hoping. You regain emotional control. And that inner shift shows externally. Your energy changes. You become calmer, more grounded, less reactive. And that version of you is far more attractive than someone anxiously waiting for attention. What's interesting is that when you truly detach from the outcome, when you're no longer focused on whether he comes back, that's often when he reaches out. Because he feels the difference. He senses that he no longer has the same hold on you. And that loss of control makes him want to reestablish connection. Men come back when they feel they've lost something meaningful, not when they feel secure that it will always be there. Access creates familiarity, but loss creates desire. When you remove access, you allow desire to breathe again. And if he does come back, it's usually different. He comes back with more effort, more intention, more awareness, because he understands that access to you must be earned, not assumed. And if he doesn't come back, then removing access saved you from investing in someone who only valued you when you were convenient. The key is that removing access isn't about manipulation. It's about self-worth. You don't reduce access to get a reaction. You reduce access because you recognize your value. And when a man realizes that you are no longer freely available, he's forced to decide whether he's willing to rise to your level or walk away. When you stop explaining yourself to someone who isn't showing up, you step into a level of self-respect that most people never reach. Over-explaining is one of the clearest signs of emotional imbalance in a connection. It happens when one person is invested and the other is uncertain. And the moment you start explaining your feelings, your needs, your reactions to someone who has already shown you inconsistency, you place yourself in a weaker position without realizing it. Explanation feels logical. You think if you just say it the right way, if you clarify your intentions, if you help them understand how their behavior affects you, they'll change. But when a man is ignoring you or showing minimal effort, he already understands enough. He understands that you want consistency. He understands that communication matters. What he lacks is not information, it's intention. And no amount of explaining can create intention where it doesn't exist. When you explain yourself repeatedly, you send the message that your boundaries are negotiable. You're saying, if I talk long enough, maybe you'll meet me halfway. But boundaries are not meant to be negotiated. They are meant to be respected. The right person doesn't need a presentation to treat you well. They don't need reminders to communicate. They don't need convincing to show up. Over-explaining also shifts responsibility. Instead of holding the other person accountable for their actions, you take on the burden of fixing the situation. You start managing the relationship emotionally. You analyze every message, every silence, every delay, trying to find the right words that will keep them engaged. And in doing so, you lose your center. You become focused on being understood instead of being valued. There is a quiet power in saying less. When you stop explaining, you create space for actions to speak. Silence after disrespect is not confusion, it's clarity. It tells the other person that you notice the behavior and you're not willing to justify your reaction to it. That kind of clarity is unsettling for someone who is used to being chased or reassured. Men often test boundaries without realizing it. They pull back to see how much you'll tolerate. They delay responses. They disappear briefly. And your reaction teaches them how to treat you. If every time they pull back, you lean in with explanations and emotional labor, you teach them that they don't have to change. You'll do the work for them. When you stop explaining, the dynamic shifts. Suddenly, he doesn't have access to your emotions on demand. He doesn't get reassurance without effort. He doesn't get comfort without consistency. And that absence forces him to confront his own behavior. Instead of you chasing clarity, he has to ask himself why the connection feels different. Explaining yourself also weakens attraction because it removes mystery. Attraction thrives on balance and polarity. When one person over-explains, they reveal everything emotionally while the other remains guarded. That imbalance creates discomfort and eventually disinterest. When you stop explaining, you restore balance. You allow the other person to meet you where you are instead of pulling them towards you. There's also dignity and restraint. Not everything needs to be said. Not every feeling needs to be shared with someone who hasn't earned access to your inner world. Emotional access is a privilege. When you give it freely to someone who is inconsistent, you cheapen your own experience. But when you protect it, you increase its value. A man who truly cares will notice when you stop explaining. He will feel the emotional shift. He may not say it immediately, but he will sense that you're no longer trying to convince him of anything, and that realization can be jarring because it means the power dynamic has changed. You're no longer waiting for him to understand, you're allowing him to choose. When you stop explaining, you also stop chasing closure. You accept that not every situation will be resolved through conversation. Some answers come through behavior. Silence after inconsistency is an answer. Distance after disrespect is an answer. And those answers are often clearer than any words exchanged. This doesn't mean you become cold or indifferent. It means you become selective. You reserve your explanations for people who are present, attentive, and invested. You stop pouring energy into someone who hasn't shown they can hold it. And that shift protects your peace. Men come back not because you explained how valuable you are, but because they felt the absence of your emotional availability. They realize that the person who once tried to make things work has stepped back. And that realization creates either growth or distance. Both outcomes serve you. The moment you stop explaining yourself is the moment you stop chasing validation. You no longer need someone to agree with your feelings for them to be valid. You trust your perception. You honor your standard. And that self-trust is deeply attractive. When you don't explain, you allow the other person to feel the consequences of their behavior. Not through punishment, but through reality. They experience what life feels like without your effort, your understanding, your emotional presence. And that experience is what makes a man reflect. When you choose yourself, everything about the dynamic between you and a man begins to change. Most people say they value themselves, but their behavior tells a different story. They prioritize someone else's comfort over their own peace. They wait for messages that may never come. They rearrange their lives to accommodate inconsistency. Choosing yourself is not a feeling, it is a decision. And it shows up in what you tolerate, what you walk away from, and what you no longer chase. Choosing yourself means you stop centering your life around someone who has made you an option. It means you no longer wake up thinking about whether he will text, call, or show interest today. Your focus shifts inward. Your energy returns to your own goals, routines, friendships, and growth. And that shift is powerful because it removes the emotional leverage someone had over you. When a man senses that your happiness no longer depends on his attention, something changes in him. People are drawn to those who are whole on their own. Neediness creates pressure. Wholeness creates curiosity. When you are no longer waiting, watching, or hoping, you become emotionally grounded. And emotional grounding is attractive because it signals stability and confidence. Choosing yourself